This is StarCityRadio.com.
You're listening to the Tate-LaBianca Radio Program podcast. I'm Brian Davis for the Tate-LaBianca Radio Program, heard live every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on StarCityRadio.com. From May 26, 2013, TLB Radio welcomes in master archivist, historian, and filmmaker, the Pope of Aesthetic-Nihilism, John Aes-Nihil.
The Tate-LaBianca Radio Program podcast from StarCityRadio.com.
When I get to the bottom, I go back to the top of the slide. Where I stop and I turn and I go for a ride. Till I get to the bottom and I see you again. Yeah, yeah.
This
Do you, don't you want me to love you?
We are what you made us. Exactly. So what's the big deal? 5 or 6 people get killed, and you all freak out and put it on us, and we're just reflecting you back at yourself.
Coming down fast, but I'm miles above you.
is the Tate-LaBianca.
Had you let us put on a defense, we could have explained to you why it happened.
Tell me, come on, tell me the answer. Baby, lover, but you ain't no dancer.
Radio program on StarCityRadio.com.
Broadcasting from the Star City of the South in Roanoke, Virginia, you are listening live to the Tate-LaBianca radio program on StarCityRadio.com. Good evening, I am Brian Davis with the always lovely LC the Intern, and as we start off here this evening, I want to wish everyone a very nice and safe Memorial Day weekend as we get ready to head into Monday. And I want to say thank you, a very heartfelt thank you to all of the veterans present and past that have made that sacrifice for us here in the United States. We certainly, I think, take it for granted. I think I'm safe to say that at some point all of us probably take it for granted. And I think we need probably more days like these to take a minute or more and remember the great service that our veterans have done for us here in our lives and before. And so I just hope everyone's having a great, safe Memorial Day out there as we, again, get underway here live on this Sunday night. And, of course, we couldn't be here. Well, I wouldn't want to be here without the always lovely LC the Intern.
Isn't she lovely? Isn't she wonderful? Isn't she lovely?
Made for love. Oh, yeah. All right, LC the Intern, how are you?
I was doing great before that.
All right.
Please, no more.
I'm sorry. I couldn't help it. I was not even thinking what I was doing. I was more or less wondering if that microphone you're holding there is...
No doubt you weren't thinking. Yeah.
I never do I?
I hope everyone's great tonight. Good to be here.
It's good to have you back. Coming up tonight, we'll be talking TLB with the master archivist, historian, and filmmaker, John Aes-Nihil. Now, for those of you that don't know, John Aes-Nihil is the master archivist of TLB Manson-related material, and much more, actually. Much more other material not related to TLB. You can see much of his very extensive collection online at Aesnihil.com. That is AES-NIHIL.com. And also, in addition to his incredible collection, Aes-Nihil wrote and directed the Manson home movies, which I believe was back in '84. You know, I've been following this Manson stuff for about 10 years now. And I had not seen the Manson home movies until about a year ago on YouTube. But I went back and watched some of it over the last couple of days. And I've got the trailer up on the website, starcityradio.com/TLB radio. And, of course, you can watch it on Aes-Nihil's YouTube channel. But that is some interesting movie making there. He made the movie as if the Manson family were filming the murders in their life leading up to. Very interesting, but chilling and bizarre, as only the man would be. John Aes-Nihil will join us on TLB Radio in just a few minutes. But first, let's get into our TLB Radio update for the week. The Los Angeles Police Department have finally obtained those decades-old tape conversations between Manson family disciple and his attorney. Detective David Holmes said the department has had the tapes for a couple of weeks now. The Elite Robbery Homicide Division and the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office are analyzing them currently. A federal judge ruled in March that Charles Tex Watson waived his right to attorney-client privilege, which is what he was appealing on, when Watson allowed his lawyer to sell the 8 cassette tapes to an author nearly 40 years ago for a book on Tex Watson's life. The tapes are, again, being reviewed to determine whether there's evidence that could resolve unresolved murders. Watson is serving a life sentence for the 1969 Tate-LaBianca murders and is eligible for parole again in November 2016. And speaking of parole, we're just 10 days away now from Leslie Van Houten going up for another parole hearing on Wednesday, June the 5th at 8:30 Pacific time in the morning. Van Houten will go before California State Parole Board for the 20th time to ask for her release. And be sure to stop by starcityradio.com/TLB radio and vote in our poll question. Do you think Leslie Van Houten should be paroled? We were just asking this about Bruce Davis not long ago. I believe right now, or at last check, it was like 67% said yes, they should parole her. What do you think, Elsie, the intern?
No.
No?
No.
Well, I mean, that's a debate we can have. Certainly, as this nears, we'll have one more show here before the parole hearing will take place. But I'd like to talk a little bit about it at some point and see what people think, because Leslie Van Houten kind of gets a little bit of consideration among the TLBers. You know, if any of them should be released, they kind of lean toward her, if any. But again, we can talk about that as this gets a little bit closer. And again, in the meantime, check out that poll question and vote if you think Leslie Van Houten deserves to be paroled or not. That is at starcityradio.com/TLB radio. Okay, a few ways to get in touch with us. Of course, you can call us any time of the day or night right here on the good old telephone, 540-999-8710, 540-999-8710. If we don't answer your call live, leave us a message, some contact info. We'll get back to you or answer your question right here on a later program. Also, Facebook.com/TLB radio. And you can also join in our live discussion room going on right now. Do we have a check-in? Elsie, the intern? What's going on in there? Oh, there we go. The bottle-wielding Katie hanging out in there. It looks like she's getting ready to tag Johnny in the back of the head. Johnny Seattle, watch out. Katie's on you tonight. All right, you might want to join in our live discussion room right now. That is, again, at starcityradio.com/TLB radio, because when we come back, we'll talk TLB with the Pope of Aesthetic-Nihilism himself, John Aes-Nihil. I'm Brian Davis, and this is the Tate-LaBianca radio program on StarCityRadio.com.
The Tate-LaBianca radio program on StarCityRadio.com.
You're listening to the Tate-LaBianca radio program podcast. Join us live Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for the Tate-LaBianca radio program on StarCityRadio.com.
And welcome back to the Tate-LaBianca radio program, StarCityRadio.com. I'm Brian Davis, and I just spoke with our guest for tonight. John Aes-Nihil will be joining us here on the Tate-LaBianca radio program in just a little bit. He's actually in L.A. driving right now. So he's looking for a spot to pull over. So here's how we're going to do this. We're going to take his call live. As soon as he finds a spot to pull over, he's going to give us a call back. So whatever we're in the middle of, we'll drop, and we'll take John's call and have our guest on tonight. Again, master archivist, historian, and filmmaker himself, John Aes-Nihil, will join us. And I got a lot to talk about with him. This guy, I don't know anyone that's been involved in TLB any longer, if at all, than John Aes-Nihil. He's been involved in this, I'm going to say, back since 1969. So he's probably seen a lot, heard a lot, and he owns a lot. If you're not familiar, check out his website again, Aes-Nihil.com. and you'll see most of everything that you see on all of the blogs and websites, most of the footage, most of the documents, most of the pictures, most of this stuff comes from John Aes-Nihil somewhere along the line. Someone buys it from him. They put it out there. Someone gets it from them. Things like that happen, but most of it comes from him, and he's just got a plethora of items. But anyway, John Aes-Nihil will call in here shortly. We'll be talking with him. As I mentioned earlier, we are 10 days away from Leslie Van Houten going up for her 20th parole hearing. Elsie, the intern, I don't see you doing anything right now. Could you give us a little poll number?
Excuse me?
Could you check the poll?
What was that? The first thing that
I said, it looks like you're working hard over there in the corner.
Uh-huh.
And maybe you could check the poll numbers for us and let us know how that's going. At last check, it was 67%. The TLBers favored.
No, I don't know what you're looking at. It's 50-50.
Well, I said it last check. I mean,
Well, if
I don't know. All right, 50-50 right now then. Okay. That's interesting. You know, I have the belief personally, this is Brian Davis's belief, okay? But I personally believe if you're convicted of first-degree murder, you shouldn't get parole. If not the death penalty, then life without parole. That is what I believe if you're convicted of first-degree murder. So with that in mind, I don't think any of them should be released. But when it comes to Leslie Van Houten, it seems people are a little bit more, what would be the word, forgiving. There you go. They're a little forgiving, more forgiving, it seems, with Leslie Van Houten. So I'm interested to see what the people think now. I love reading the comments when I see like the Yahoo put up a story, a mainstream story from the AP, you know, Manson clues on the tapes or whatever they put up. And then you read the comments underneath. It's the people that aren't into the TLB thing. You know, they don't follow this every day or every week. They're not on the blog boards or their forums. They're just normal, you know, Joe Plumber out there and happen to come across the Manson story, and they read it and they go, oh, that guy should have been killed years ago. They're very cut and dry with it. Whereas if you read the comments within the community of TLB, it's a lot of forgiving and so forth. So it'll be interesting. Hey, speaking of interesting right now, our guest is going to be pretty interesting. He's calling in right now. Let's go to our phones on TLB Radio, StarCityRadio.com. John Aes-Nihil, is that you?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for calling in. Did you finally find a spot to pull off, or did you say heck with it and call while you're driving?
No, I found a place by a dried-up river.
A dried-up riverbed, then. Okay. I would imagine there's a lot of dried-up rivers out there in California or near the desert or any of that area, or maybe I don't know my geography. Is there a lot of them?
Yeah.
Very well. Well, John Aes-Nihil, thank you so much for calling in. I tell you, I appreciate you very much for making time with us, especially now that I know the situation that you're in. You're actually driving around. Can I ask, what's John Aes-Nihil up to on a Sunday evening on Memorial Weekend?
Well, I went to a flea market in Hollywood. I left the desert at 6 a.m. and picked up a friend of mine, and we consigned photos to a photography dealer. And one of them sold as soon as people saw it.
Very well. John, you're doing business then on a Sunday then, huh?
Yeah.
Now, do you work all the time, John? Are you one of those guys that's always working, always looking for something, always trying to make a deal? Or do you ever take any time off?
That's sort of hard to say. I mean, there's always something going on. Like photography and movies and music.
Well, I know recently, I guess last week, Robert Hendrickson was in town there in L.A. doing a premiere of his movie, Manson, from the 70s. And, of course, you were familiar with that and you attended. What were your thoughts coming away from that?
I mean, I have a 16-millimeter print of it, which I've had for about 25 years. Somebody brought it to me at a flea market, and I traded a bunch of Led Zeppelin records for it.
Do you like the movie, John? I mean, do you consider it a masterpiece in terms of TLB, or what are your thoughts on it overall?
Well, I mean, it's certainly the ultimate movie on the Manson family because they're in it. I mean, I think, well, I mean, ideally he should, you know, like put out a 10-hour movie. Well, he said that he had well, sometimes he says he has like 100 hours of footage or something. But I mean, it would be incredible to see just like the raw footage.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what I take away from it too, John, is just the actual footage that he got out there to give us a kind of a glimpse of a day in the life of what it was like to live on the ranch in the family surroundings. So I really see the value in the actual footage itself. Interesting. Some of it looked a little bit staged, but I don't know. Do you feel some of it was staged, maybe?
I talked to him about that.
What?
Well, Blue claims that dialogue with the guns that her and Red and the other girl did, she claimed it was scripted and that they were just doing what the filmmakers wanted. And I told that to Hendrickson, and he said he'd never heard that before, but I have it on tape in some interview that Blue did. And he said there was absolutely no way that scene could have been staged, because you could never get a scene like that staging it.
I don't know, John. It looked pretty staged to me. Just my opinion. I think it looked pretty staged. Yeah. Before we get too far into this, I want to talk to you a little bit about your name, because I feel a little bit more stupid than normal right now. Because, as you know, when I initially talked with you, John, I had to ask you how to pronounce your name. And then once I started reading your website, it all came crystal clear to me, at least what the name was, Aes-Nihil. For those out there that do not know, Aes-Nihil is short for Aesthetic-Nihilism. Talk a little bit about that name. Where did that come from? What does it mean? How did that come about, John? I mean, surely your parents didn't name you Aes-Nihilism, or did they?
Well, that would have been interesting. Some people think it's Russian.
I think when I initially talked to you about it, I said, what ethnic group is that or something? So I didn't know, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, as far as I know, I invented the term aesthetic-nihilism, although people have said that the author Mishima used it. But then it would have been a translation from Japanese, so it's hard to say. And then I came up with it, I think, in 1966 to describe the music that I was doing, which was like music that's so extreme and so intense that it verges on destruction. So it's like this extreme creation of some kind of art thing. And a lot of people get fixated on the nihilism part, which is just basic destruction or believing in nothing, which is absolutely not what it's all about.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that John Waters actually tagged you with it as well. Is that something he came up with back in the day, or how did he get involved with you?
Well, I met him at the premiere of Desperate Living in Manhattan, and Jamie Remard, who's made about 50 movies by now, was just starting acting, and he was in the Warriors around that time. And I was making Manson family movies, so we both started making movies in extremely different directions at the same time, pretty much. And he knew John from Provincetown. And I mean, Jamie didn't even like John's movies, but he knew him and was good friends with him, and he introduced me to him. And I was living in Boston at the time, so I brought stills from Manson family movies and showed them to John, and he said he was really interested in it. And then the group of people that I lived with in Oakland, which we did the band Beyond Joy and Evil, and we also made Manson family movies, and it was basically everybody that lived there was part of it. And we went to, I think, Death Valley to Barker Ranch, I think the first time on Christmas in 1976. And part of the bus was still there, and the photo of that is in the Manson file. And so I sent John a postcard from like Shoshone or just some town around there. And then when we got back to the house in Oakland, John was in San Francisco, and he called and he wanted to see the movie, which was only partly edited. So I literally glued together a rough cut because it was shot on film. And John came over and watched it and really liked it. He helped promote it later on. And then I came up with the name, the Archives of Aesthetic-Nihilism, and instead of putting that, John shortened it to Aes-Nihil. So that's how that happened.
And it's stuck ever since then, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, John, one of the reasons and you've been on my list of guests or prospective guests that I've wanted to get on the program, I think, since I started this thing, because I've been following your website for quite a few years, even before the radio program started. But one of the reasons I wanted to get you on is because I don't know of another person really that has been involved in this TLB thing, Manson thing, as long as you have probably. When did you get involved in this, John? How long have you been doing this?
December '69, when they found out who did the killings, and it was on the headlines on all the papers, and everybody was going on and on about it. And it suddenly became really difficult to hitchhike. I mean, the effect was pretty extreme. It was like the general public decided that hippies in general were like mad dog hippies. They're going to kill you.
Did you start going to the trial, or how?
I was in Oakland, and I would have had to hitchhike to L.A. I mean, I wish I did, but I didn't.
So basically, did you just start out collecting articles and stuff of this?
Yeah, I started collecting stuff like newspapers and magazines, whatever at the time.
John, what initially attracted you to this, though? I mean, I guess you mentioned a minute ago the impact it had on society. I guess was that the initial attraction? And then what has kept you in it all of these years? Like I say, you're one of the few mainstays from the beginning of this.
You know, I think Robert was the other one. We've both been majorly involved in it since 1970, anyway.
Sure. What's the attraction, though? What is it that keeps you into it?
Well, at the time I was reading Stranger in a Strange Land. And since Charlie named one of his children Michael Valentine, Charlie or people in what's called the family were definitely into the Heinlein book and influenced by it. Although Heinlein was extremely against hippies, and it was sort of a warning to him. And to other people, it became like the Bible of the hippies. I mean, it's sort of like Paul Morrissey's movies, which attract all kinds of people that could be called deviants, like drug deviants and sex deviants. Paul Morrissey claims to be extremely conservative and extremely against all that behavior, and he considers his movies to be warnings about it. Although it certainly doesn't work that way, but that's how he sees it. Mm-hmm. But initially, I mean, immediately I saw it as a witch hunt, and Charlie was being, and the family were being, well, Charlie was being tried for witchcraft, for causing other people to kill for him. And I just don't believe in that concept, because everybody is responsible for their own actions. And the people that did the killing did it because they wanted to. And by now, I figured out that Tex Watson and Patricia are probably the only ones who actually killed anybody in those situations, because Sadie was just bragging about it, and Leslie apparently stabbed a corpse. Not that that improves the situation, but that seems to be what happened. Mm-hmm. And so it was just, everybody was arguing about if somebody could cause all these people to kill for them or not.
John, do you find the interest in TLB or Manson as high as it was back when you started? I would imagine when you started doing this, I would imagine the interest was very high back in the 70s and probably into the 80s when some of the talking heads on TV started to get Manson on in interviews. Do you find the interest still as high?
Well, I mean, it gets bigger all the time. I mean, it's turned into all sorts of things. I mean, it's well, like the whole helter-skelter concept is turned into a worldwide universal myth kind of a thing. And Charlie's one of the most famous people on Earth, which is pretty crazy considering that most people consider him to be just some sort of mad dog, horrible criminal who killed all these people. When
in reality, I mean, we know that he didn't kill any of them.
It definitely speculation is that all the killings were because of Tex Watson's drug deals. And Tex Watson was going around routinely ripping off people, including lots of Papa and Jay Sebring and Wojtek.
Well, that's interesting you say that. There's a lot of speculation right now, John, throughout this what we call a TLB community here. And it's almost kind of a community divided, if you will. Half of the group on one side is saying Tex Watson, drug dealing, burns people on drugs as his MO. The other side is saying there's no evidence to support any of this. But, John, you would know something like this because you were there back around in those days. And so you're saying that it would be likely that Tex would be dealing and ripping people off.
Well, I mean, another thing is that I started my movie in 1974, and shooting it was basically done from 74 to 79. And all these concepts are in the movie. But I mean, it's an extremely primitive movie, and it was made for less than $1,000. And it took 30 years for it to get commercially released. And I mean, it was rather amazing that it did. But Nico of Cult Epics was totally into it, totally behind it. We completely restored it before it was released, and everything in it is off of film now, because there was video elements were added over the years, and those were taken out, and everything that's in it now was shot on film.
Now, John, you're talking about the Manson home movies, correct?
Well, it's Manson family movies, actually.
Okay, I appreciate the correction. Manson family movies. Tell us a little bit behind that, the story behind that, because on the surface, it's a very chilling, bizarre movie, but when you put it together on how you came about this, I found it very fascinating and brilliant, John. I thought it was a brilliant concept. Talk about how this came to be, the Manson family movies.
Well, let's see. Originally, I was going to make another movie starring this girl that I knew back then, I still do know her, who called herself King Hog or King Mama. And she actually does the screams and the murder scene in the movie, and she did the title cards. And I was going to make a movie about what her and this friend of hers was doing. And it was stuff like going to people's houses and shitting in boots in the closet, spitting on things and licking things. And then I went to see Pink Flamingos at the Elgin Theater in New York the first year it was there at midnight. And I was sort of shocked that this other guy had basically made that movie. So then my other idea for making a movie was to recreate the rumor that the Manson family filmed their activities, including recreating the murders. And I mean, that's the rumored to exist the real Manson family movies. And I talked to John about the existence of them a lot. At that time, he was talking to Tex Watson a lot. Tex totally denied knowing anything about that. And in a way, it almost seems like Hendrickson's movies are sort of that.
I agree with that. It was uncanny how you found the actors that you got. They looked just like the original people, very almost near identical. Was that by happenstance?
The girl who played Squeaky, people sometimes think is Squeaky. And she actually knew Squeaky and Blue. And she was pretty paranoid about being in the movie. And after she was in the movie, her apartment caught on fire, and she sort of blamed it for being in the movie.
I can understand that, John. A lot of weird things happen to people that are associated with this phenomenon.
The other thing about the real Manson family movies is that Ed Sanders said that a famous artist bought them and has them. And I was absolutely certain that he was referring to Warhol.
Was he?
And then I found out that Warhol, on like the second floor of his house in New York, was filled to the ceiling with unmarked film cans. And then I asked John about this idea, and he said, well, if you ask Warhol, he'll just say, I don't know. Then I was at a flea market in Hollywood around that time, and me and this guy that played three different people in the Manson movie. He played Paul and Abigail.
You had a guy play Abigail?
And Wojtek. I mean, because we didn't have any money, we would shoot no matter what. And if half the people didn't show up, I would just call people until somebody did.
Well, and then let's remind people, there's no lines, there's no dialogue.
Well, it was shot on regular rate film, which is silent film.
Right.
Because it was a silent movie, I think I got better acting out of these people who had certainly never done acting. Anyway, to get back to the Warhol thing, me and that guy that played three parts of the movie were walking down Hollywood Boulevard a couple of blocks from this flea market that we were at, and there was a sign in front of a bookstore, and it said something about Warhol, and then we looked at the date and the time, and it was right then, so we went in and got in the line. And we didn't have whatever book he was signing, so he gave us copies of interview and signed them. I still have one of them. And the guy that I was with was talking to him about Studio 54, claiming that he always went there, and I think he was just making that up. But Warhol was quite interested in that. And then I asked him about the Manson family movies, and as predicted, he just said, I don't know. And when he died, all those movies went to the Museum of Modern Art. And so if somebody has the real Manson family movies, it's the Museum of Modern Art, assuming that Warhol had them.
Right. What do you think? Do you think they were really out there?
I don't really have any idea.
Okay.
The other story is that they stole NBC's equipment and made them with that. And there doesn't seem to be anybody who has ever collaborated that. Tex totally denied it.
Maybe it's on those tapes, those text tapes that the police have now. Just kidding.
Audio tape.
I know. I'm just kidding, man. I was just trying to throw something in there. So, John, let me ask you then, out of your collection, is there anything that you don't have up for sale or that you won't sell that you want to keep?
Well, I mean, the print of Manson, I mean, Hendrickson actually wants it, but he doesn't seem to value it very much because he wanted to trade me his DVDs and his book and a poster for it. I mean, I don't know what that was all about, other than apparently, I didn't even know he wanted it. But I mean, when I met him at the premiere of Inside the Manson Gang like 5 years ago, we talked. Well, I taped him and myself and some like three other people talking for about an hour after the movie, and then me and this friend of mine Jason talked to him for 2 more hours after that with the camera off. And I was talking to him about the print, and he said, "What's the color like?" And I said, "It's really good." And he said, "You probably have the only print with good color," because he said all of his 16s had turned to pink, and the 35 that was showing last week had okay color, but I actually think that the color on my print is better.
I wouldn't doubt you. Let me ask you about an item I saw. Someone wrote this on a blog a while back, and I marked it. I said, if I ever talk to John, I'm going to ask him about this. So here I am getting to talk to you. But, you know, in the book Helter Skelter, and not just the book Helter Skelter, but a lot of people, they always say that Charles Manson, his mom was a prostitute. He never knew his father. Just all of the stuff that they have pushed on us for years that, you know, now that we've been able to have access to some of this stuff on our own, John, we can see the truth. And part of that is I heard that you own a picture of Charlie and his father together. Is that true? Do you have a picture of Charles Manson and Colonel Scott together?
Well, there's 2 other people. His uncle is also in that, and a third relative is in it. He wrote symbols above the heads of 3 people in that photo.
He wrote symbols? What were the symbols?
Sort of hard to see.
Okay. Probably a swastika.
It's like a, no. It's like a, well, I assume that that's a photo of a photo. That was part of the stuff that I got when I bought out Bill Nelson.
Well, that was kind of one of my next questions is how you get your material, John. Do you get it from other collectors? Or is it in a case of where someone passes away and you might have an opportunity to buy their collection up? In the case of Bill Nelson, is that how you accumulate some of this? Most of it?
I got Bill Nelson's stuff way before he died.
Okay.
I mean, by the time he died, he was pretty much completely insane.
I think is that something where?
Well, I mean, I think the real reason that Bill Nelson was so obsessed with the case is that since Blue found the court papers that he was a convicted pedophile, is that he was insanely jealous of the rumors of all the orgies that they had. I mean, I think he subconsciously or something knew that he had gone completely in the wrong direction. Because he was a minister in Canoga Park while the family was having these orgies at Spawn Ranch, according to what he thought.
That was certainly a bomb that Blue dropped on him and everybody when she kind of outed him as the child molester that he was, I guess. That was pretty much the end of him, wasn't it?
Not really.
You don't think that was? Didn't his website come down soon after that?
Well, that's a possibility. Well, I mean, I don't know what the operations were for, but he was, totally covered in scars from all these operations. I guess they were giving him drugs.
I think he had diabetes or something, too.
Well, I mean, something was causing him to basically get very whacked out. And he was becoming completely impossible to deal with and creating really insane stories, that sort of thing.
Wow. I'm glad I didn't have to deal with him then. Hey, we're talking with John Aes-Nihil, the aesthetic nihilist himself, here on the Tate-LaBianca radio program. John, can we take a couple questions from our live discussion room we have going on right now? I got a couple here on deck, if that's okay.
Yeah.
One of our listeners, Johnny, he wants to know if you happen to have in your collection a copy of the April 1969 police report, which outlines the robbery of Joel Rostow. Would you happen to have that in your collection?
No.
Do you know what that's... What's that?
Is that the guy that was killed like a couple of years, like in 1971?
Yeah, that's him.
A sort of a double agent drug dealer.
That's him, you know.
I mean, the drummer in my band played somebody based on him, but I didn't know the name back then. It was sort of a composite idea. In my movie, from stories I was hearing, I created a scene where he was actually an FBI agent.
Interesting. He may have been. I mean, we don't know.
Which was just sort of trying to put pieces together.
Right, sure.
Because I haven't seen Nicholas's book, but I listened to that 3-hour interview. And an interesting thing to me is that a lot of the revelations that he discovered are in my movie.
Is that right? Well, the discussion room here at TLB Radio wants me to ask you about a few people here and get your reaction to the names. Nicholas Schreck would be one of them. They wanted me to ask you about Nicholas Schreck. What are your thoughts on Nicholas? And you said you did not read the book. Do you intend to read it, or do you already kind of know what it says probably?
Well, I mean, I definitely want to, but I don't really want to pay what the price is. Although somebody said they might trade me or their copy of it. Well, the same with Hendrickson's book. I've never even seen it. I mean, I definitely want it, and I definitely want to read it, but paying around $100 for books isn't really going to happen.
I understand. What are your thoughts on Nicholas Schreck? Because you actually know him personally, and you've collaborated with him a little bit. What are your thoughts on Schreck, then? You say most of his stuff in the book was already in your movie. Is there anything you can talk about specifically?
I mean, not really most of it, but a lot of the ideas of what was going on were in my movie.
Like drug burning?
Basically just based on rumors. Like that guy we were just talking about. I had in my movie, but I didn't know what the name was. I didn't know what all the details were. And all that stuff about Leno and his bookie, The Phantom, and possible mafia connections and all that sort of thing.
You don't subscribe to that? You don't believe that?
Well, I mean, I don't really know.
Okay, so
From the very beginning, I've always heard that Leno's phone was being tapped by somebody, and he owed a bunch of money to some group.
you heard that too? You've heard that yourself, that the phones were tapped?
I mean, I heard that way back. It's in my movie.
That the LaBianca phones were tapped?
I have a scene where like Leno loses all his money at the track. Then his bookie calls him on the phone demanding money, and he doesn't want Rosemary to know about it.
You know, John, you may be closer to the truth in your movie than you think. But Nicholas Schreck said that a LaBianca family member is the one that told him that the phones were tapped. How did you come about that knowledge?
I mean, it seems like it might be in maybe Ed Sanders' book or maybe Billy Osie's book.
Gotcha.
I'm not really sure.
Okay. But it was kind of well known then. It was already known.
Yeah, well, I mean, another major thing is that there's piles and piles of connections of the killers knowing the victims years before under all sorts of circumstances. And there was this odd play about a year ago in Hollywood, which was completely based on the idea that Charlie and Abigail were having an affair.
Yeah, they even threw Shorty Shea in the mix, didn't they? Isn't there like a story that Shorty, Abigail, and Charles Manson all had lunch together?
I don't know that I've heard.
Yeah, man. That's a story. I couldn't make that up.
Well, the main thing that I've heard from the very beginning is that there was this party for the free clinic in San Francisco, and all the Folgers, including Abigail, were at it. Colonel Tate was at it. Charlie and Sadie were at it. And then there's the first person I ever interviewed when I was doing research for the movie was Paul Krasner, who said that he had seen a film or possibly an early form of video that showed, let's see, Charlie and Sadie going to the Tate house when Sharon lived there and doing MDA and having an orgy with Wojciech and Abigail.
Get out.
And I recreated that in the movie.
John.
But then, about 2 years ago, Deborah Tate, in an interview that was on television, which I have, although I'm not sure which show it was, she said, yeah, those people were here all the time. They used the pool, they used the bathroom.
Right.
Because, I mean, according to Bugliosi, it was all the stuff about random, which is just absolute nonsense. They routinely partied with Harold True, and then there's all this stuff about the LaBianca's daughter's boyfriend in the Straight Satans, and the LaBianca's house was creepy crawled a week before the killings by people in the Manson group.
Well, let me ask you something. Go back to Joe Dorgan. Was Dorgan a biker? Was he in one of the biker gangs?
The Straight Satans, I've always heard that he was in that.
You did hear that he was actually in that. Okay, I'm trying to, myself.
There's a more recent version of it that it was actually Danny DiCarlo who was her boyfriend.
Wow, I had not heard that.
And then there's this concept that it's like Rosemary's baby killed the LaBiancas.
Rosemary's baby,
implying that it was that Suzanne arranged it because she wanted to get the inheritance early.
Oh, man. Somebody's asked me in the discussion room here. I got a question in front of me, John. What are your thoughts of Ken Anger? Talk about Ken Anger and your work with him.
Well, I lived with him for about 4 or 5 years. Apparently, that's the longest anybody can survive that. I don't know. I mean, we seem to be a good combination up to a point, but eventually it got crazy and sort of blew up, sort of.
Are you on good terms?
Well, I go to dinner parties with him. I went to one about 4 months ago.
Okay, so you guys are on good terms now, at least speaking terms.
Yeah.
What about your relationship with Shrek? Are you guys on good terms now, too, or no? Did you guys have a falling out, or what happened with that, if you don't mind me asking? What were you guys doing together?
Well, I mean, I don't really know. I mean, we were all living at this house in Hollywood, and then they moved to Austria, actually with the money they got from suing A Current Affair, because I saw that A Current Affair showed his Manson interview twice, and the contract said once. So he sued them and won, and then moved to Europe and gave me the house, which I managed to keep for a while.
Now, so what were you working on music with him or something?
I mean, I was on on Songs for the End of the World, reciting a Mel Lyman piece that had always been done in my band Beyond Joy and Evil.
Okay.
Something called Something As It Really Is, which we'd been doing since '74.
Oh. Well, let me ask you,
the Lyman family's another thing, another group.
Interesting. Would you consider Shrek credible for Manson research then? Would you consider him a reputable, credible source?
Well, most likely.
Yeah, I agree. We're talking with John Aes-Nihil, by the way, here on the Tate-LaBianca radio program. I'm so happy to have him on here tonight. What are some things you're looking for now? What are you looking to collect now that you don't have? I can't imagine there's anything left.
Well, I mean, there's the real Manson family. There's movies. I mean, there's all kinds of these movies that nobody's ever seen, but everybody knows about. Like the ones that Roman made, which the LAPD took. And then these two cops had them, and Nelson tried to get them away from one of them. Nelson was working with one of the cops. One of the cops gave that footage, according to Nelson, gave that footage to the other cop, and Nelson said, now that the other guy has it, nobody will ever get it.
Was this the footage of the orgy movies, the porno movies?
Well, I think what Nelson told me that the cop had them at some point. That it was actually just Roman and Sharon having sex.
Yeah.
But there's other people who name all these movie stars like Steve McQueen and Peter Sellers. And of course, every single one of them is dead.
Yeah. Interesting.
And then there's the thing about the Ventura County Line Beach movies.
What is that for those that don't know? I don't know. So can you enlighten us a little bit on that? What are those? I had not heard about those.
Well, it's sort of like the Manson family and the process and the OTO were doing human sacrifices at Ventura County Line Beach and filming it.
Wow.
It sort of ties into the whole ultimate evil thing. It's an extremely entertaining book, but I don't think any of it's at all accurate.
Well, John, you have been around this basically from the start. You have seen it all. You have probably heard it all. And I'm sure you own most all of it. So what do you think happened? Why do you think the Tate-LaBianca murders happened? What do you think the motives really were?
Well, I mean, it's primarily Tex Watson's drug deals. Because, like, Tex Watson was selling drugs to lots of Papa, and he did the thing of saying I have to go get them, and then ran out the door, leaving some girls who were from Spawn Ranch there. Mm-hmm. And then he went back to the ranch and apparently told Charlie what had happened, and so Charlie had to go over there to retrieve the girls, and then ended up shooting lots of Papa because he wasn't cooperating, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And then there's Sadie's posthumous book that just came out, which I read, and she blames the whole thing on Charlie thinking that he killed lots of Papa and thinking that lots of Papa was a Black Panther. And a combination of that and Tex Watson's drug deals is what she, at the end, said the whole thing was all about.
It all comes down to basically Tex Watson screwing people over and getting everybody else involved in.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tex Watson is the one who killed all
everybody.
The famous people.
Yeah, he killed everybody. What about the LaBiancas? I mean, do you tie all of this in together and say it's Tex Watson, or is there something separate for each night?
Well, I mean, there's some people, including a cousin of the LaBiancas, who I taped an interview with. He completely denied that Leno had anything to do with this drug thing, but he thought that Rosemary might have. And Rosemary's estate was over $1 million.
Yeah. Okay, hold on, John. Let me go back for a second, John, and make sure I understood you right. So you talked with a family member, the LaBiancas, a cousin, and they told you that they think that Rosemary was dealing drugs?
Well, it was sort of like if anybody was, Rosemary was, because he was adamant that it wasn't Leno. He was related to Leno and not Rosemary.
Okay. So basically, it's still up in the air, everything then, John, isn't it? I mean, we may never really know the truth to all this.
Well, I mean, it just keeps, I don't know, sort of getting crazier. Although, more information is always coming out, but more misinformation is always coming out.
That's the problem. For every piece of information we have, there's always two pieces or more of misinformation. And then you've got websites such as Evil Liz that want to spread disinformation and Cat's Cradle and all that. What do you think of Cat's Cradle?
I never heard of it.
Yeah, I don't think you would have either. Most haven't. Don't worry about it. It's another one of these websites that continues to perpetuate the disinformation that goes out there. What do you think of these websites that have sprouted up? Because you said a lot has changed over the years with this. A lot of it are these blogs and websites that are dedicated, and radio programs, I guess, that are dedicated to TLB. What are your thoughts on these websites that pop up?
I don't pay much attention to it, actually.
Well, that's good enough. I mean, I wouldn't either if I were you, John. I'd have better things to do. So, but I did find it interesting how we came to do the interview tonight. Would you mind, before we let you go, talk about how this came to be? Because I had been wanting to get you on, as I said, John, and it just kind of happened out of the blue. And thanks to Paulina, our mutual friend, for lining this up. But if you would share how that came to be that night at the Hendrickson premiere that you stumbled onto us.
Well, Hendrickson was talking to people on the patio, and everybody was talking at once, and there were people going on about whatever their thing was, and sort of hogging everything. And then, well, this one guy I think realized he was doing that, and so he sort of pushed me to the front, and she got to the front at the same time. Although earlier, this friend of mine, Dan, pointed her out to me and said that she was involved with this radio show and I should be on it. He was going to introduce us, but that never happened. But I knew who she was. And so then she started talking to Hendrickson before I did. And I knew that she was going to ask him to be on the show, and I knew that he was going to refuse. But I got my card out, and when he refused, I handed her my card and said, "Oh, I will."
Well, I'm so glad you did, John. I'm telling you, it was a pleasure, and I'm glad this came to be tonight because, as I said, I don't know anyone that's been in it from the start or as long as you have, probably. So, again, just thank you so much for doing that with us. Let me mention this. I just got a message here from our discussion room, John. This is from a listener named Chatsworth, and they said to please tell John thank you for making so many great things available to invested people. I have bought a lot of things from that website, John. So they're just saying thank you for putting the stuff out there for us to buy and own ourselves.
All right, Chatsworth, you're welcome.
Very cool.
Another thing about tonight is that when I realized I wasn't going to get home in time, I was near Michael Channels, and I thought that might be an interesting place to do this. So I called him, but he didn't seem to be there.
John, I can tell you, if that would have happened, that would have been TLB radio magic, my friend. That would have been an incredible twofer there because he is on my list as well, Michael's Back Porch. So I'm glad that you think a lot of him as well. He kind of does what you do in a sense, doesn't he?
Yeah, although he's collecting all these artifacts.
Yeah, like dirt and stuff. He's got like dirt from Spawn.
Yeah, which I haven't really done.
You're more into the pictures and the autographs and so forth, right?
Yeah, because Nelson had some really amazing stuff, like the original slides that Roman took of Sharon on the set of the Fearless Vampire Killers. And it's like his personal shots from that, because he also shot stuff for Playboy on the set of the Fearless Vampire Killers, but these are all a completely different collection. And then another thing is these original slides that were taken on August 5th that Wojtek and Jay took of each other in Sharon. And there was this other actress who was there that day, and her son contacted me, and he knew every shot that was taken, and he confirmed the date of August 5th because the slides are stamped August 69.
And he was able to confirm it was actually August 5th?
Yeah. I mean, I guessed that it was like August 3rd or something like that, and then I finally found out it was actually August 5th. There's been a lot of famous people that I've gotten the last photographs of.
You don't just collect and archive Manson TLB related. You do many others as well, don't you? Talk about some other things you have on there.
Well, William Burroughs, because I shot a movie at William Burroughs. Well, William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg were at LACMA in L.A. at the opening of Burroughs' Port of Entry show. And this friend of mine, David Woodard, was building dream machines. And he had the dream machine that was in the museum for that exhibition. So that's how the whole Burroughs thing started. So I taped Burroughs and Ginsberg talking to people and signing stuff and whatever. And then me and David went to Burroughs' house in '97 and basically just shot a conversation with him. And I took a lot of photos at LACMA and at Burroughs' house. And Ginsberg is in about half of the photos from LACMA with Burroughs. And Ginsberg died not that long after, so that's sort of the last photos of Ginsberg, possibly. And then I got the last photos and video of Burroughs at his house. Although you too videotaped Burroughs almost at the same time, so I'm not sure who did it in what order. But I don't know what you two did with their footage. But it's taken forever to get this William Burroughs and the Dream Machine edited, but we're working on it right now.
How many people do you have with you that help you, John? Is it a big staff?
Well, I mean, it's basically me. Well, there's some people in New York who are doing a lot of the online stuff.
Well, John, I got to tell you, man, you do a great job with your website. I love going to it. I go to it quite often myself. I'd never been able to afford anything off of it. You know, I'm a radio guy and we don't make a lot of money, John. You probably know that. But I do enjoy going to it and looking at the amazing, incredible items that you have up there. Are you planning on writing a book or anything yourself anytime?
Well, some people have said that I should. I mean, there's an insane amount of Manson books right now. There's probably 15 that have come out in the past 2 years. And a lot of them I've never heard of, and I have no idea what they are.
I would think you would be one of the ones that could write about it.
Yeah, well, I'd definitely like to. I don't know if it's happening.
I guess you're just content with collecting then.
Well, I mean, I've been writing an autobiography of sorts in chronological order.
Okay.
I thought it was an interesting idea, literally starting with the first thing you remember and then just going on from there in chronological order.
I'd like to see that sometime. I might try that myself.
Just about anybody could do that.
Well, that's what I mean. That'd be a fun experiment to run on yourself. Sure. I might try that tonight, actually. It'd be kind of fun. Well, John, listen, my friend, we're going to let you go. Are you still pulled over somewhere, or where are you sitting right now?
Well, I haven't gone anywhere.
Oh, all right. I didn't know. I thought you were pulled over off the side of the road somewhere.
I'm next to a railroad, the Metro Link tracks that go from the desert into downtown L.A. It's like this canyon with a dried-up creek in the bottom of it.
It's amazing, the technology, what we can do, man. You can sit near a dried-up riverbed and do a worldwide broadcast on the Internet now. It's amazing.
I mean, I wasn't planning on doing it this way at all, but...
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for improvising, I think, John, and I think we did that very well here tonight. John, thank you again, my friend. I really appreciate you doing this. I'd like to, if you don't mind, could I keep your number on file and catch up with you from time to time just to get your thoughts on things as they come out through the years? Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure.
Appreciate that very much. John, certainly a pleasure. We appreciate you making time for us tonight, and I just say thank you so much for coming on with us, my friend. Thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome.
The Pope of Aesthetic-Nihilism, John Aes-Nihil, joining us here tonight on the Tate-LaBianca radio program. Good stuff from the master archivist and historian and filmmaker, John Aes-Nihil. All right, we're going to come back and wrap things up here in this extended episode of the Tate-LaBianca radio program. I'm Brian Davis on StarCityRadio.com.
TLB Radio.
You're listening to the Tate-LaBianca radio program podcast. Join us live Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for the Tate-LaBianca radio program on StarCityRadio.com.
All right, welcome back to the Tate-LaBianca radio program. Brian Davis here with you with the always lovely LC the intern. Well into overtime here tonight on TLB Radio. We just got off with John Aes-Nihil, the aesthetic nihilist himself. I enjoyed every minute talking to him. I really enjoyed it. He was one of my guests on my list that I had compiled back when I started this whole thing, and I'm just excited. I couldn't believe it. We finally had a chance to catch up with him, and the way that we were able to do it was kind of interesting in itself, which I want to say thanks to Paulina, by the way. Paulina, thank you very much for setting that up with us. And then John, to call like that on the fly, he had to actually pull off near a dry creek bed or something. Good stuff here on the Tate-LaBianca radio program here tonight. For our guest, once again, the Pope of Aesthetic-Nihilism, John Aes-Nihil. For LC the intern, for our live discussion room, I want to thank everybody for listening in here tonight. Thank you for your support. We much appreciate it. I'm Brian Davis on the Tate-LaBianca radio program on StarCityRadio.com.
You've been listening to the Tate-LaBianca radio program podcast. I'm Brian Davis. Join us live Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for the Tate-LaBianca radio program on StarCityRadio.com.
Just kind of hang with me, and I got a plan.
What's your plan?
TLB Radio. 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 Radio.